Alright everybody, welcome back down to the shop here, working on the next episode of EveRide's DRZ 400 Extreme Makeover. As you can see, we've got the carburetor all pulled apart here. Now EveRide had a little bit of a problem with this carburetor. I think he solved it. Basically, he found that he'd be going along and then chop the throttle down to idle, and then it would just quit on him, just die as if it was leaning out. He'd pull the choke on and then he could start it right back up again. At first I was thinking maybe his pilot circuit was probably a little too lean, but after a little more discussion with him, come to find out he thinks it might have been his tank bag that was pinching off the vent hose to his tank, which can cause some big problems. So basically, long story made short, we're going through and we're going to clean this carburetor really well. Go through everything, make sure it's nice and open, there's not any plugged jets or anything, and we're going to install this aftermarket pilot adjustment screw. So as most of you know, this pilot adjustment screw right here adjusts the low speed fueling, mainly at idle and just barely off idle. The bad thing about that is you have to get a screwdriver in there to change it, and if you change altitude radically and your bike won't idle, it's really nice just to be able to reach down and make a little small adjustment with the idle speed mixture screw, which is what this is right here. So we're going to remove that and we're going to put in this in its place. We're going to clean everything out, and Mr. EveRide here is going to be using an FMF pipe, which kind of opens up the airflow a little bit, and we're going to do the standard airbox mod. And I'm going to just pull this over here so you can see it real quick. Oh freak, that's heavy with the battery in it. This right here is what is called the snorkel, and as you can see there's this little teeny opening for air to come in. That's very, very restrictive, and what people do on the DRZ 400E models, they actually remove this snorkel, open up that 3x3 box, air box, so that more airflow can come in. And when you do that, when you allow more airflow to come into the engine, it's going to basically lean the motor out a little bit, so you have to compensate with jetting. So what we have done is we are going to install a dyno jet kit into his carburetor. Now people ask, well, why do you do that? You can just use stock jets. I do a lot of stock jetting anyway. Yeah, you can do that, but there's one little thing about the dyno jet kit that I like, and that is, if I can pull it out here, insert Dirty Joe.
Insert Dirty Joe. Need some help pulling it out there, Mr. Tough back there?
You can see right in the bottom, actually I'm going to set all this stuff aside for a second. It's this little magic deal right here. That is known as the needle. Okay? The taper on that needle basically will determine how clean that motor runs through the mid RPM, where most of the riding occurs on these bikes. Now there's different manufacturers, different needle combinations. The reason I use the dyno jet kit is because they've got dyno graphs with this particular bike showing the horsepower increase, and they claim about 5% increase when you use their jetting and their needle combinations. So we are going to actually clean the carb really good. We're going to install the dyno jet kit. We're actually going to install the jet for the 3,000 to 6,000 foot elevation range, which is what is going to be best for EveRide's riding down to St. George. And if it goes up above that, it'll probably be a little bit rich, but that's no problem. It's better to be a little rich than too lean. And if he goes below that, well, he's going to probably be somewhere outside of Utah, so we'll have to tackle that then. But hopefully that'll make the bike run better, more clean, give him a little bit more power, and potentially even a little bit better mileage. So we're going to go ahead and do that now, and start working on pimping out his carburetor so we can put it all back together and start getting the airbox and stuff back on the bike. So stay tuned here. We'll kind of show you when we get all finished up with it, but that's the next step, guys. Okay, everybody, just one thing I want to point out with the dyno jet kit. This is where the main jet goes, and you can see the needle sticking out there. As I rotate the throttle, you can see it pulls the needle up. Well, to fit the dyno jet jets, the dyno jet kit jets in there, you have to use this adapter, and you have to thread that on in the original place of the other jet, and you have to tighten that all down, and then you put the main jet inside of there. So the other thing to mention too is their numbering system is not like the stock numbering system on the DRZ. So don't think the numbers match. They don't. They're totally different. So what we're going to end up using is the D136 main jet, which is the jet that's designed for aftermarket exhaust and intakes, and between 3,000 and 6,000 feet elevation. So the main jet really doesn't come on until you're probably half throttle or more. It has a little bit of effect below that, but mainly half throttle or more on your throttle position to really bring the main jet on. So the middle ranges are controlled mostly by the needle, which we'll talk about in just a second. But just wanted to point that out. Make sure you get that adapter on there before you put the main jet in. And then right here is the air jet, and right here is going to be your pilot jet. And the pilot, we've got a new one here we're going to slide in there for the pilot side. In fact, we'll just drop that in right now. And then we'll get back with you in just a minute and show you the other stuff. Okay folks, I just want to give just a quick little update here. We've got the float bowl back on. We checked the float level, we reset it to the proper height. We installed this new idle mixture screw right here. We've got it set at 1 1/4 turns out right now. I think I screwed up in the last segment. I said that we were going to keep the stock pilot. Actually, we're not keeping the stock pilot. We put a 48. Stock is a 45. And with us opening up the air box and the exhaust, it's going to lean it out a little bit, so we put a 48 pilot in there. And so the next thing we're going to do is change the needle, and the way you do that is you get through the top of the carburetor, and that's where the slide is. So we're going to take this off real quick, and you'll see the way to get to the pilot, or excuse me, the needle. And you can change the clip position and do all kinds of tuning up here. So once you remove this, you're going to see right down here there's a set screw, and you actually have to take that out. Too big. You have to take that out in order to get to it. And sometimes it can be a bugger, but actually that was really easy compared to a lot of them. You're going to take that plug out, and then right underneath that is going to be your needle. You can see it right there, and you can use needle nose pliers to bring it out, or sometimes you can just tip it like this. Open and close, and there is a needle. Now you want to make sure before you pull it out there's no spacers. There's usually a little plastic spacer in there. There isn't one here, so that's the stock needle. That's going to come out, and if you look at the difference, you can kind of see barely that this needle is thinner and the taper is not as radical. So whatever they've done in their research, they figured out that it runs better by changing that taper on the needle. And what we're going to do is we're going to put this clip in the 5th position, so you count the top down, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you take that clip off of this and you're going to put it in the 5th one down, and you simply slide it back in, put the plug in, put the top on, and then you're done. So we're going to do that off camera here, and then we'll be right back with you for the next mod, which is going to freak EveRide out when he sees us doing this, but I think it's going to be a good thing for him. So if not, too bad, homie. Okay, EveRide, you're going to crap your pants when I tell you what we're going to do now. So if you don't want to crap your pants, just skip this part. But we're going to remove fairly significant part of this carburetor. Actually, what we're going to do, this circuit right here, this diaphragm, and this hose that comes up onto the would be the intake side of the carburetor, as well as this hose that goes down into this little vent line right here, is all part of a deceleration enrichening circuit. There have been a lot of complaints with people with the DRZs having a flat spot in the off-idle to mid-range, and it's not linear, and people have discovered that it's this deceleration enrichener circuit that's causing that. And so in the state of Utah, we do not have emissions control. This really doesn't have much to do with emissions control anyway, but that's what scares some people from changing it. But what we're going to do is we're going to actually remove this entire circuit and this little nipple that comes out right here. Insert dirty joke. And this little nipple right here are going to simply be plugged off. And by removing that, it's going to remove that off-idle sort of hesitation and make it much more linear. Now, the other thing that I wanted to mention here is that people say, well, gosh, I'd really love to have a fuel-injected bike over a carbureted bike. And there may be some value to that, but there are some things about these carburetors that are really nice. And that is when you decelerate, the way these slides are designed, and this one not so much as the diaphragm slides are, when you cut the throttle, you get a little bit of airflow that still comes through there that actually smooths that out and makes the braking engine braking not quite as radical. On fuel injected bikes like the KTM I have, when you cut that throttle off, it about throws you through the windshield. So that's one thing. Don't be afraid of a carb bike. You can do some jetting and tuning and make it really nice and run great and be totally out of mind, not have to think about it. So to get this enricher circuit off, basically there's a nut here and a nut here. You have to hold the socket right here and then take that off and then just simply unplug the lines and then put nipples on the end and you're done. So we'll show you what that looks like when it's done. We got Rojo over there rubbing off with some sandpaper. Oh, yeah. We also have gracing our presence today, Dirty Sanchez. And we got an issue, another issue that we found. Right here on the side of the carburetor is what's called the throttle position sensor. It goes into a wire that looks like this. There's 3 prongs. Now you can't see it too well on this camera, but there's 3 basic prongs. There you can kind of see them, that you measure resistance between, and I'm not going to go into it right here because I was going to show a video on how to do that. But basically, this throttle position sensor is junk on his carburetor. The circuit is open, which means that there's no contact between any of the 3 pins here, and there should be contact enough through resistance, and you can adjust this throttle position sensor one way or the other to achieve the numbers that you're looking for. Now, on this bike, it's a pretty rudimentary deal in that all this does is helps control ignition. So that doesn't really change fuel or anything like that. It just controls ignition. But it can make the bike easier to start and maybe be a little bit more smooth. And we're trying to do that with the jetting and everything, so it makes no sense to go through the time and effort of doing all the jetting and not fix this throttle position sensor and get it dialed in. So we've got the top of the carb back on, bottom of the carb's done. We've removed, you can see here, these are the 2 plugs. One right here and one right here that we removed the deceleration enricher circuit. So that's gone. It's simplified things. But we're going to have to get a new one of these, so we're not going to be able to put this thing back together today. We've got to get a new throttle position sensor before we can actually put this carb back on the bike so we can adjust it and make sure it's right. So I don't know if you guys remember, we were talking about this low speed or idle mixture screw that we were going to put in. Well, we took the original one out, we put the new one in, and unfortunately I went to put the carburetor in the bike, and this thing hits the starter and it won't let you align the carburetor up with the intake manifold right. So just epic fail for you guys. Don't bother to take the time to buy one of these for your DRZ 400E. If you've got an electric starter, it won't fit. So just go with the stock one, leave it in there, and you might have to just go the old school route in terms of adjusting it. I know you can't really see it, but there's a little flat blade screw in there that's going to adjust your low speed mixture. So don't worry about that, guys. Just use the stock one, okay? It'll save you a little trouble when you're trying to mount things back up. We're back down here getting the carburetor back in the bike. I need to show you the last part of removing the deceleration enricher circuit. If you remember, that part was right in here. We removed it and plugged off these 2 nipples right there. Where's Rojo when you need him? Well, there's one more part of it, and I'm going to pull this fuel line down. You're going to see this nipple sticking right in the intake track of the head. that right there is where vacuum is pulled in to operate the diaphragm on that enrichener circuit. You have to make sure you put a nipple covering that, a rubber cover on it, a Jimmy hat, with a clip ring to hold it down tight, so otherwise you're going to have a massive vacuum leak there. The bike will run like crap. So you need to make sure and plug that off. So it'll be 3 points. This point, and that point all need to be plugged off, okay? So this right here is just the fuel line that goes back to the tank. That simplifies everything down in here. We still, we're waiting for this new throttle position sensor to come. We have access to it right here, so we're going to go ahead and button up the bike the best we can, and while we're waiting for that to come, and then we'll adjust that as we go along before we get it all final put together. So just want to make sure you guys don't forget. That's really important, okay?